Hello. We have decided to take a moment and talk about Desiree. We wanted to kind of explain her background and explain a situation that happened this past weekend. We think it's important and great information for everyone to know, a good testimonial. It is kind of a hard situation, but we don't typically share a lot of stuff, but we are going to share this. Hopefully it helps somebody. So just a little bit of background on Desiree. I've had 4 daughters. 3 of my children I had without any medication. I did not have an epidural. I didn't have any type of medication, natural birth. Desiree is my youngest. With Desiree, I did have an epidural. During delivery, they were having trouble getting me to dilate because prior to having her, I had had cervical cancer and I had had my cervix frozen, and they told me that my cervix may not dilate like it normally would. And so after I'd been in labor for a little while, they talked me into getting an epidural in case they had to take me in for a C-section. Normally I would not do that. So I did end up getting an epidural with her. There was some more issues that had come up that had caused me to go ahead and okay that. But after Desiree was born, she seemed to have a lower immune system. She got sick quite often. At 6 weeks old, she got RSV. She seemed to get every cold that went by, any flu. At 3 years old, she had pneumonia. She was sick a lot. She was constantly wheezing and different things. They finally diagnosed her with asthma at 3 years old. Her asthma at 3 years old seemed to be somewhat normal or minor. I don't know how you would call it. It was just something that we would give her a rescue inhaler or treatments if she had gotten sick. But that progressed to the point where she had to be on daily steroids. She had to be on about 4 or 5 different medications. She was on pills and inhalers and just all kinds of different things. She spent multiple weeks in the hospital. Anytime she would get the hiccups, it would put her in the hospital for 3 to 5 days. She could have the hiccups for a minute and it would put her in the hospital. If she was ever anywhere near a cat, she was in the hospital. If she got a cold, just a simple cold, a lot of times we'd be in the hospital. It was just, she was always sick. And it was so bad that there were parents of her friends who would actually keep their kids away from her because they were so worried about her catching something from them, because she'd been in the hospital so many times that they didn't want to feel like it had anything to do with them. So she was a very sick child. She spent a lot of time in the hospital. She spent a lot of time being poked at. She spent a lot of time in pain. After a few years on the medications, she started having seizures and she started fainting and passing out, because I think it was a mental trigger. If she smelled alcohol, she would pass out. Anything that reminded her of hospitals would cause her to kind of shut off. So she began having a lot of issues. And then we were at a cookie booth, and I know some of you have heard this part of the story, but we were at a cookie booth, and this was a day where she was not sick. We thought she was having a great day. We woke up early. She was a Girl Scout. She was actually, my older ones were Girl Scouts, and she was the one in the blue.
Daisy.
A daisy, yeah. And so technically she wasn't supposed to sell cookies, but we brought her because I was taking all my other girls. And so she had her little daisy thing on, her apron, and she had 2 boxes of cookies in her pocket, and she's very energetic and very friendly, and she's trying to sell cookies, and she was having a lot of fun. And so she looked up at me and she said, "Mommy, my tummy hurts." And it had to be God, because I've never reached down. Her tummy's hurt a lot, but I've never reached down. But when she said it that time, I reached down and put my hands under her arms. And the moment my hands went under, her heart stopped. And she went limp and her eyes were open. And she had no pulse. And so what I did was, my hands were under her, and I went down and I scooped her up. And so now I'm holding her this way. And I'm screaming, "Call 911, does anybody know CPR?" I am screaming, asking for help, and I'm searching for a pulse and I can't find it. And I'm yelling her name, and I'm begging her to wake up, and I'm praying, and I'm asking God to give her back to me. Please just give her back to me. To stand there and hold your child without any life in her has to be the worst thing I've ever had to do. But that moment changed her life, because that moment showed me that medication is not helping her. It's making her worse. We went to the hospital and she spent a couple days in ICU. Then she spent about 4 or 5 days in the cardiac unit. She spent about 4 to 5 days in the neurological unit. They ran every single test you could possibly run on her. They had tubes running all through her body. She was in so much pain. They put her through so much. Now you have to understand, there were signs, and the doctors knew that there were signs. She was taking chunks of her hair and ripping them out. Her anger, she would have anger outbursts where she would take her head and just beat it against the bathtub. And she would scream, and she had nightmares, and she was living a horrible life. And she couldn't wake up in the morning. She was just so exhausted all the time from the nightmares. And it made her start peeing the bed. And she went through so much. And so after her heart stopped and I found out about the medication, God opened a door in the hospital. He gave us a new lung specialist. And the lung specialist was willing to listen to me. She was willing to take her off every medication. And she was willing to watch her and let me try raw food and let me try juicing. And she was willing to open her mind to the fact that maybe there's another avenue, because it's killing this child. My daughter was 6 years old and I held her with no life, okay? Now I believe, and I don't know if this is true, but I believe that the epidural caused her immune system to be lower. And so over time, she's just progressed and gotten sicker. So most of you know that we changed her to 100% raw and we started juicing. And from day one, she has not had another asthma attack. She has not had another seizure. She has not had her oxygen drop below 98. She's had no asthma related problems since then. Now this past weekend, we were extremely busy and we didn't get enough water, and we didn't get to juice. And so she had been exposed to a sickness, and the sickness seemed to cultivate in her, so she had gotten a fever. And then she fainted at church on Sunday. And so we had to take her to the hospital. The hospital ran tons of tests on her heart. They did a complete nutritional workup. They did everything. and they found that every single vitamin and mineral was perfect. Her red blood cell count was perfect. Her white blood cell count was perfect. Even though she had a fever and she was actually starting to get sick, she wasn't showing a sickness in her body. Her body was completely healthy. They said that she fainted because of dehydration. And of course, we will make sure that that never happens again. But it was encouraging to us to see those numbers come back, and to see that, and for them to prove that we've been raw now for a year. Desiree's been 100% raw for how many months? 5 months. She was raw previous and then went high raw. Now she's been 100% raw for 5 months, and we juice every day, and her vitamin and mineral blood test came back absolutely perfect. She's not deficient in B12, she's not deficient in iron, she's not deficient in anything. Everything came back perfect. And they don't see that. So we wanted you to know, number one, being raw and juicing does not exempt you from becoming sick. If you put strain on your body, you still can become sick. Number two, you must get your water in. Number three, it is possible to keep your nutrients, get all your nutrients with 100% raw food and juicing.